essentially, the importance of that case isn't, though, just limited to protecting babies that will be in their mother's womb from 15 weeks until birth. But in order to rule for Mississippi in that case, the court will likely have to reverse Roe versus Wade, which established a constitutional right to abortion. So it is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to protect life and to essentially overturn Roe, which is a horrendous decision by the Supreme Court.
I want to talk for a moment about a couple of cases going on that have been in play here in the United States, like the couple of sets of Wisconsin parents that have filed a lawsuit against Kettle Moraine School District to challenge its policy that allows minor students to change their name and gender pronouns at school without parental consent. Why is that important?
Well, parental rights are under assault in this nation, and we need to take it seriously. My concern is now that the masks are off in schools, this concern that parents have where they're starting to pay attention to what their children are being taught, and they're exposed to that through the Zoom calls, is going to fade away. And that's a grave mistake. Those types of policies are being taught in the school curriculum regularly all over the United States. And many parents, I'll hear parents say, well, I live in Texas or Tennessee. This is not happening here. Baloney. It is happening across the United States, and we have the evidence to prove it, which is why we've filed these lawsuits. And it really comes down to critical theory. And the concept of critical theory is that there are victims and oppressors, there are good guys and bad guys, that we don't all have inalienable rights, that on the gender identity front, which is the case you referred to, that you're not born a boy or a girl, that biology doesn't matter, and that actually the state has the right to make decisions on behalf of the parent. So ultimately, this is a parental rights issue, but the gender identity ideology at the core of the case you mentioned is so corrosive to all of our First Amendment rights and to the health and well-being of our children. It is a serious threat that we need to understand and to stand against.
I know a lot of parents are saying, what can we do about this? I mean, do I pull my kids out of school? Do I support ADF? What can we do?
I think that, each family needs to consider their own options, but you shouldn't be naive to think that just because you're not seeing it in the papers that a child brings home, that it's not going on. The policy that you referenced in Wisconsin is just a school policy, and it allows teachers to lie to parents, essentially, about a child's gender confusion. In that case, a 12-year-old girl was suffering from confusion, and the school refused to abide by what the parents asked for, and they did have to pull the child. I think we also need to consider that our children are being instructed 6 hours a day in these schools. So if you can pull them and get them into a school that has solid Christian education, and even if you're not a believer, not a Christian, in a school that isn't set on indoctrinating children in woke ideology, which is what most of our public schools are doing right now.
In another incident, Mississippi school official forced a third grader to take off her Jesus Loves Me mask. What do we need to know about that case?
I wish you could meet that third grader. Lydia is just the most amazing 9-year-old girl. And it was during the COVID situation. She went to school. Of course, she had to have a face covering. And other students got to have writing on their masks. But the school essentially targeted Lydia's religious speech that said, Jesus loves me. It's a long and winding case in many respects. But I think what will surprise people the most is that when she was told to remove her Jesus Loves Me mask, she was also told by the school that that was consistent with its policy. And what Lydia's mom learned later was that they were deceiving her and that hadn't actually been in the policy. Students at public schools, they have the right to be able to express their faith in their private expression, and the school does not have the right to target people of faith or target religious messages. And that happens all too often. So it's a privilege to represent Lydia, and the school has changed its policy because of her stand, although the litigation continues today.
Can you tell us about the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case? Why is that important?
Well, that's a critical case in our effort to protect life. In Roe versus Wade, as well as in a subsequent decision called Casey, the Supreme Court essentially made up its own rules on whether abortion was protected in the Constitution and when and how. And it's a complicated path because, again, they're just making it up. It's not based in the text or the history of our nation or our Constitution. And so the Dobbs case is a case involving a Mississippi law that essentially restricts abortion after 15 weeks. And if you know anything about fetal development, you know that at 15 weeks, that baby is a baby. There are, the baby may feel pain. There are eyelids, hands, fingerprints. All of these things are there. Essentially, the importance of that case isn't, though, just limited to protecting babies that will be in their mother's womb from 15 weeks until birth. But in order to rule for Mississippi in that case, the court will likely have to reverse Roe versus Wade, which established a constitutional right to abortion. So it is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to protect life and to essentially overturn Roe, which is a horrendous decision by the Supreme Court.
Now, can you clarify that for us? If Roe versus Wade gets overturned by the Supreme Court, does that make abortion illegal across the country, or does it just push the decision to each state to make up its mind?
It pushes the decision to each state. It essentially says the Constitution the federal Constitution doesn't give a right to abortion, which means next we would look at the states' rights and what the states do. So really what it does is prompt a discussion in each state and potentially a decision to decide whether to protect life or not to protect life, which again underscores the importance of hearts and minds, Kirk. It's our job as people to have those conversations with our neighbors, to influence our kids so that we can continue to have a pro-life culture.
Do you think that America is in trouble with this woke ideology and the direction that we're headed? If we don't reverse course and get back on the right track, where could all of this lead?
I think that the Bible tells us to love God and love our neighbor. And those are the two most important instructions that he gives us. And so I think loving God means that we're faithful to the word, we're faithful to our beliefs, and those beliefs actually protect religious freedom and free speech and human dignity for everyone, even those who don't believe as we do. Loving our neighbor means expressing those beliefs in a compassionate and kind way, but it also means standing up when we see that laws are passed and the culture is going in a direction that brings harm to children, and we will reap what we sow. So on the one hand, I'm not a fan of the direction that we seem to be heading, but I also think about the example of Pharaoh and Moses, where he's out killing the Hebrew boys and one of them's living under his roof. We don't know what God has for this season. What we do know is that he asks us to be faithful, to be winsome in our speech, and to be witness bearers for him. And my role is here in the law. Your role is in advocating in the many different things you do. And those who are listening all have a role that none of us can play.
History teaches us that it's often during times of moral decline, of economic depression, and spiritual apathy that the family of faith finally wakes up. And you see that behind the scenes, God is using these external pressures to awaken and alarm his people and help us to remember that when we choose to sin, we choose to suffer, and the path of obedience is the path of blessing. And I think we are teed up for revival. And I am so thankful for you, Kristen, and for ADF and all that you're doing to protect our freedoms. You're truly making a mark on the nation. Hi, I'm Kirk Cameron, and thanks for watching the Kirk Cameron on TBN YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. A couple of things. Please make sure that you hit the subscribe button and tap the bell icon so that you're notified every time a new video is posted. And be sure to share your takeaway in the comments and invite a friend to join the conversation.